Hello, ATSU, and welcome back to another session for today's Lunch and Learn series, where we try to innovate, inform, and entertain. So that's our little catch line.
I like it.
Let us know what you think about that. I'm Brian Krusniak. I'm one of the hosts of the Lunch and Learn series, and joining me today as co-host is Kit Avanzato.
Hello, everyone.
Kit, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing good.
Although I must say, I am missing a little certain someone.
I wondered if you were sad because Joe's not here today.
A little sad, just a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's okay.
So for the viewers, he did check in earlier and kind of pumped up the volume as Joe tends to do while he was here. But we're giving him the day off. He said he's doing lots of calculations for the new federal leave,
Fair Labor Standards
Fair
Act,
Labor
yep.
Standards Act. Thank you. So, but that's last episode. For this episode, we have a couple of really interesting guests and good topics. So we're going to kind of walk through accessibility and kind of what that means. And then we'll go into Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. And with us today is Jennifer McNeely here on my right. Jennifer is the director of the Learning and Disability Resources Group, and she's based on the Kirksville campus.
Yep.
So thanks, Jennifer, for joining us.
Thanks.
And then via remote from Mesa, we have Kimberly Jones, who is the Disability Resources Advisor. You can talk, Kimberly. Say hi.
Hi.
All right, good. So let's go ahead and get started. And we're going to start with you, Kimberly, if we can. Just tell us a little bit about what Disability Resources, what that group consists of, and what it is that you guys do.
Sure. So I represent the Mesa campus, while Jennifer represents the Kirksville campus, along with our online programs. And we work together to ensure equal access for students with disabilities. And we do that by providing appropriate academic adjustments or accommodations for qualified students.
Okay. So explain to us a little bit what types of accommodations we might be talking about.
Accommodations they really range from easy to complex. So they could be for testing. Students may need longer time for tests, or to test in a separate reduced distraction environment because they may get distracted easily. Or they could be physical, like maybe they need the use of some sort of assistive technology when working out on their rotation. So different things like that.
Okay. And I know it used to be, I think you guys recently went through a name change, correct? So it was just learning resources in the past, correct?
Correct.
Why the name change?
Well, we are seeing more and more students requesting accommodations, and so students need to know who to contact if they're requesting accommodations, disability-related accommodations. So we really wanted to make it transparent and easy to find, so we decided to change our name to Learning and Disability Resources, because our department always handled that in the past, but it was not within our name, so we decided to make that change.
Great.
It's interesting. You mentioned disability. Would one of you mind defining disability by chance?
Kimberly, you want to handle that one?
Sorry, I can't hear.
Oh, you can't hear.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Kimberly. I'll repeat the question. I don't know if my microphone is a little bit hotter. But Kit was asking, is there a formal definition of disability, or can you kind of give us a sense of what is disability? Define it for us.
Oh, okay, sure, absolutely. So a disability is any physical or mental impairment which substantially limits a major life activity. So major life activities could be physical, like walking or seeing or hearing, or it could be mental, like reading or learning.
Okay. And then how does accessibility fit into disability?
So accessibility ensures that all of our physical and online documents and tools can be easily understood by anyone, including students with disabilities. So an example of assistive technology would be when you're on a website and you see an image, that image should have a tag that can be picked up by screen readers, so that way students with visual impairments can understand what the image is depicting.
So tell it, what does a screen reader do?
I'm going to handle that one. I think she's having a hard time hearing. Screen readers will basically read to an individual who has a visual impairment. It will basically read to that person what is depicting on the screen. And so if there's an image showing, a screen reader has to have a way of describing that image to that user.
Okay.
And also any like videos that are displaying usually will have another assistive technology would be, say, captioning for that video.
Okay. So really accessibility, if it's a visual impairment, then it may be something like a screen reader. If it's an audio impairment, then it may be something like closed captioning or
Correct.
Similar technologies.
Right.
Interesting. Do you have any other examples of kind of what other types of techniques or tools that you guys use to deal with accessibility?
Oh golly, we basically that kind of goes into a little bit of our process, I think. And Kimberly will touch on this a little bit later, but I'll give you a preview. When we first hear from a student and we are discussing their situation and their particular disability, it's an interactive process where we talk with the student about how is your disability impacting you and what can we come up with as the creative solution to work around that or make things accessible to you to eliminate that barrier that exists by your disability.
So it seems like it's pretty personalized then at that point.
It is. It can be very personalized.
And is it just the two of you, or kind of how do you handle that if the requests tend to be going up? Is there more demand for your services now, and how do you handle that with it being highly personalized?
There has been, our numbers have been increasing, although they're still, I can't tell you the exact figures, but they're manageable. And typically it's Kimberly and I, and then we have two other people on our committee. But then we also have each program has an accessibility liaison who is kind of the go-between between the program and disability resources. So they help us figure out if the accommodation is reasonable, if the accommodation is how we're going to implement it, basically.
Great. So you mentioned all these different accommodations, and they're great overall, but is there a reason behind them specifically?
There is,
yeah,
and I think
sure.
everyone is familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that particular law, and then also a couple of sections 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Those are in place to protect individuals with disabilities against discrimination. So yes, it's the law, and accessibility is actually a civil right, not a special privilege, not it doesn't give someone an advantage. It's basically designed to level the playing field for students with disabilities.
I think it's great, even for those of us who don't have defined disabilities. I use closed captioning all the time.
Right.
That's a great example of a benefit that I receive just because we're doing it kind of the right way.
Correct. Right, and that leads us into another one of our topics, but we'll save that for later. The universal design. So.
And it kind of plays into this whole culture at ATSU in terms of welcoming everyone and talking about diversity and how diversity is more than just Hugh at ATSU. So I guess my next question would be, how does disability kind of parlay into that whole culture of diversity?
Diversity?
Yeah.
Well, it's true. The ATSU's, we do have a strong commitment to diversity, and disability is part of that. I read a study, I think the CDC determined back in just last year, 2015, that about 1 in 5 people in the USA have a disability. So that's 20% of the population. Whereas 20% of students, especially in the health sciences higher education, probably don't have a disability. So that particular piece of the population is not represented, relationally to the general population in higher education. So the more students that come through our doors and we can educate, will just increase the knowledge base out there in the world and create better healthcare providers all around.
That's great. Have there been more complaints regarding accessibility or lack of accessibility? Do you see that, and how does that come through us as an institution?
Absolutely. As individuals have grown up kind of in the age of ADA, students have gone through their entire educational journey receiving accommodations for their disability. So they are insisting on that right still, as they increase into higher education. So numbers are increasing, the need is increasing, And so therefore the complaints are increasing for institutions and just areas where institutions just can't keep up, or institutions do not work adequately to provide accommodations that are necessary for these students. So complaints have increased.
Great.
Great.
Well, let's take a little break,
Yeah,
if
sure.
you would, Kit, and then when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the universal design for learning.
Absolutely. But going into break right now, we're going to talk about something really huge here at ATSU, and that is Founders Day. So on the Mesa campus, we're celebrating that this week, and then on the Missouri campus, we'll be celebrating that next week. So here it is.
All right, well, welcome back. And hopefully that little break gave us a chance to get our audio kind of figured out. Kimberly, are you hearing us okay?
Yes, great. Now, thank
good.
you.
Good. So let's kind of move in from the what you do to the how you go about doing it. So maybe, Kimberly, you can tell us a little bit about the process. How does it work?
Sure, absolutely. So a student will initially contact Jennifer or I with a request for academic adjustments. And then we'll send them a couple of forms that they'll need to fill out. Nothing, it's all painless. Basically, they'll just have to say what their disability is and how it affects that major life activity that I was talking about earlier. And then we'll also request documentation from either a doctor or educational psychologist or a psychiatrist. And then once we have all that paperwork and documentation, then the Technical Standards and Academic Adjustments Committee meets to review the student's request and to figure out if the accommodations that the student's asking for are appropriate. And so then we'll meet, we'll discuss it, and then the student is notified via a letter. And the letter only goes to the student, Jennifer and I, and the accessibility liaison. And we do that because then the student is responsible for giving that letter to their instructors, because they may not want to use their academic adjustments for all of their classes. They may only want to do it for, say, 1 or 2 classes. So this way, it doesn't have to go out to all of their instructors, only the ones who need to know. And the whole process takes about 2 to 3 weeks. So we definitely recommend that students apply early, not 2 days before a test, because we will get those requests sometimes too.
So the student actually gets a choice on when to apply their accommodations and when not to?
Yep, absolutely. So sometimes we'll have students who will only do it for, say, a final, exam that they're really worried about. Other times they'll do it for every single test and quiz, and then other times students won't use them at all. They'll get them set up here at AT Still, but really they'll just want to use them for their board exams. So they won't use them here at AT Still, but they will use them for their board. So they can pick and choose.
Interesting. So help us understand then, when they would go to the boards, to me that seems like it's kind of outside of ATSU's purview, but the accommodations still apply for that, hey?
Yes, they do need to apply separately, but it helps them to build a case when they can get them here at AT Still. Usually if the student has never had accommodations before or not here at their graduate school, they won't get them for the boards. But if they have them set up here, then they're more likely to get them for the board exam. So it helps them out.
Interesting. And then do you guys facilitate that, or is that on the student to go through that process?
That's on the student. They'll need to apply separately for that because they can't guarantee that they'll get accommodations for their boards. But I do fill out a lot of paperwork for the students. That way the students can prove that they did receive accommodations here.
Okay. And what about from the instructor standpoint? What does the instructor's role include? I mean, do they know about any of this beforehand, or are they just told exactly what to do?
It kind of depends on the student. Sometimes students will talk about it with their instructors, but typically we don't recommend that. We recommend the students to come straight to us, and then once we've made a decision and they have adjustments in place, then they should notify their instructor. So that's when they choose to use their adjustments, we let them know, and then myself and Jennifer, depending on the student's program, will work with them to implement those adjustments along with the accessibility liaison. And that's a faculty representative that we have from each program. So for example, if we're working with an OT student, then there will be a faculty representative liaison in the OT program. And so they can help us with adjusting or implementing those adjustments, because they might know a little bit more about the program than Jennifer or I do.
Okay. So are the liaisons, that's a different role than I think you called it the Technical Standards and Academic Adjustment Committee. Tell us a little bit more about that. Who makes up that committee then, and what's their role?
So the liaisons, they're typically chosen by the program. A lot of them are program chairs, but other ones are just regular faculty. And then, so there's one for each program, and they are not a part of the committee, but sometimes we'll bring them in when we're trying to figure out if the adjustment that the student's requesting is appropriate. Because sometimes students may request open book tests, but that's not appropriate because it may alter the fundamental nature of the program. So we really use those liaisons to let us know what the requirements of the program are, how the students are assessed. Are they assessed with multiple choice tests or essays, things like that. So again, they can answer the more program specific questions. So they are the liaison between the committee and the student. So they help us with those implementations once the decision's been made.
Okay. And then who makes up the committee? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
So the Technical Standards Committee,
Yeah.
or yes.
Well,
Okay.
I assume it's all the same, Technical Standards and Academic Adjustment?
Yes, that committee, it's composed of myself, Jennifer, and our other learning advisor, Crystal Hendren. And so it's the three of us taking a look at the documentation and figuring out what would be appropriate, what wouldn't be. And then again, we'll refer to the liaison if we have questions.
Got it, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
It's a very intimate bunch. We try to keep it as confidential as possible.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, that's the right thing to do. But I do want to break a little bit and talk about universal design and just universal design for learning. So we mentioned that earlier, but can you kind of describe what that is, kind of more in detail?
Sure. Universal design is when you're building something, designing a structure, designing a program, designing an environment with the broadest range of possible users in mind from the get-go. So it's basically just trying to initially build something that will be usable by as many people as possible. So, and universal design for learning is universal design with learning in mind, or with learning
Right.
environments in mind.
Okay, interesting. So I guess You mentioned how it pertains more to learning and learning environments in particular, but what is the ideal version of, I guess, accessibility in general?
Well, universal design is kind of the ideal because if you could design something from, the initial point, from ground zero, to be usable by anyone, any person, that would be the ideal. And of course, the ideal is never attainable usually. So it's a goal to have in mind when you're creating things, and it eliminates access barriers before they're ever in place. So if you can identify potential access barriers and design around them, that's really what it's about.
Right, and it's good that you mentioned barriers. So for me, I imagine in our culture as a whole, we're just having so many new barriers pop up out of the blue. Are you guys going to have to constantly adjust for accommodating these new barriers, and are you forward thinking in that as well, or?
We definitely try to be, and since the ADA has been put in place, people are pretty familiar with physical barriers, and we know about widened bathroom stalls and automatic doors in everywhere. The grocery store, that was kind of a universal design technique. So it doesn't just benefit individuals who can open that door, but it benefits all of us, because what if our hands are full? So universal access is designed to benefit everybody, not just individuals with disability. But since a lot of, I don't think I mentioned this before, but a lot of the complaints now to the Office of Civil Rights and Department of Justice and the Department of Education are not complaints about physical barriers. We've done a pretty good job with that. We're now in the digital age, so digital inaccessibility is now, the complaints are outpacing physical barriers. So, and as we know, technology is constantly changing, and so universal design with technology in mind is constantly a moving target. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think of universal design for learning really as being kind of a website-focused thing, but you're saying it's actually more general than that.
It can be. It's going to encompass our entire educational delivery system, and really, some basic ideas about universal design are already pretty well in place. We can talk about, many of our courses in the MERC programs are offered. There's a live lecture, and so you can go and you can hear and you can see a person presenting. There's typically a video display that's kind of accompanying that with an alternative display of that information, bullet pointed kind of in a PowerPoint form. And then also often classes have a practical side. So there's, the didactic information, but then there's also, you can demonstrate your learning in a practical aspect. So, allowing different formats of displaying that information or providing that information is universal design as well. So.
It almost seems to me like in the physical world, you would have designers, and the designers would always complain about the engineers, because the engineers would never design things very well. They design it for, just engineering.
Right.
And in the academic world, it's almost a similar thing where you have instructional designers who we almost need to train to use these techniques so that it gets designed right the very first time, and then it's helpful to everyone throughout.
Absolutely, and that's one of our goals. There's been a new committee formed for accessibility for the university, and it's got a lot. There's a lot of players in the you've got to have the academic side of things, you've got to have IT side of things, you've got to have the disability side of things. Everybody working in conjunction with coming up with, we've got to come up with policies for going forward. This is how we need to do things so that we are compliant. And so you're right, a lot of education is necessary. And so we're kind of hoping that we can put some of that in place kind of on an annual basis, where we're educating faculty and staff about how you can think about accessibility as you're designing your instructional materials.
Excellent. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up the topic for the most part. Jennifer, Kimberly, thank you both so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
You guys have been excellent. But I do also want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about our little social media channels as well. So, if you'd like to see us on YouTube and watch Brian and I in HD, like anyone would, of course,
Don't do that.
Our YouTube page is actually its.atsu.edu/YT. So make sure to go on that YouTube page and subscribe to our page there as well. And then also going to our Facebook page. Our Facebook page is its.atsu.edu/FB. So make sure you go on that and like that page. So as of right now, we're going to break. We're going to go for a little break, but we'll be right back, so don't worry. And introducing this next commercial, it'll essentially just be about October is essentially
Cybersecurity Month.
Month,
That's
right?
Very
so
important.
we prepared a little video for you here, and here it is. And welcome back, everyone. So our next segment that we're going to run for you right now is our Get to Know with Kit and Joe segment. Now, you guys probably know at this point why we're doing this, but just to further explain, a lot of times people here at HSU have some, I guess there's a little mystery with regard to administration or leadership here. So we wanted to do these Get to Know with Kit and Joe segments to kind of provide some enlightenment and some information about our fearless leaders here at HSU.
But Kit, I have a question about these. It's getting to know with Kit and Joe, but so far I've only seen Joe.
Well, guess what's going to happen next time, Brian?
All right.
It's going to be me.
All right, good.
Yeah. Yes, Brian was right. This time it'll be Joe. And Joe was actually fortunate enough to get in the car with Dr. Gary Cloud. So Dr. Gary Cloud is Vice President for University Partnerships here at HSU. And here's a video for you.
All right, hi, my name is Joe Vincent, and here we are again in a day in the life with Dr. Gary Cloud, who is the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships, and he's been kind enough to get into a moving automobile with me, which already wins you points. What was your early career like, and then how did you end up finding HSU, or how'd they find you?
Yep, so I did some family business in the construction industry. While I was a part-time student, I was always a part-time college student. Never really a full-time.
Never went to school.
Student. Finished my doctoral degree about 6 or 7 years ago. I work at ATSU as a blessing to me. I am so fulfilled getting to work in a place where I can bring the message that people are suffering.
Right.
And I have an institution around me that can work to address that. We have now, I believe, 19 community campuses that are health center based, plus we have our regional campuses, and I spend a fair amount of my time engaging those where we have students who are based in a community. So.
Cool. So what's the change agent? Like, I can get down with that. You and I at least share that in common. I like going and fixing something. But so I'm gonna ask this, maybe even though you already said the answer, so maybe rephrase it if it is the same answer. But like, what's your favorite part of your job?
My favorite part of my job is clearly the people I work with. So I've had a rich and varied career and worked in a lot of great places with some neat people. But the president's staff team and the deans, and I am so fulfilled. strong word even. I am so excited to get to work with the people that I work with. I very much look forward to coming to work.
Yeah.
And to have our time going home.
Yeah, that's cool. I agree with you. It's a good place to work. The hard question, if you were an interviewee, it would be, what's your greatest weakness or something like that, where you say it's like, oh, well, I'm too compassionate. But what's the biggest challenge that you face in your job? Or in terms of what you want to get done,
Right.
what's
So-
the biggest obstacle that you have to overcome?
So there isn't the time available to interact with all of the really cool health centers around the country that I like to interact with.
Yeah.
There aren't the resources to meet all the needs that we get to see, or that I get to see. That's the biggest challenge.
So there's a lot of needs still that's going unmet.
Really, so there's about 6,000 medically underserved areas in America.
Really?
About 62 million Americans live in them. These are folks more likely to be of color, more likely to be of low income, have poor access to care, have much shorter lifespans. There's a lot of suffering out there, and
Within the United States,
just in the United States.
Yeah.
So those are, it's not easy to look at that and then say, well, what's my responsibility?
I had Dr. Gavitt sitting here one day, and I asked him what he did in his spare time, and he told me very emphatically he has no life. So if we begin to see a pattern here, we're going to get worried about you guys and send you to Chuck E. Cheese or something. So what do you do to kill time in your spare time? What are your hobbies?
Well, it doesn't get any better than hanging out with my grandchildren.
Okay, that's a good
I have
answer.
2 grandchildren. My daughter had been working for a Christian relief agency doing overseas training at the time she got married about 8 years ago, and she was doing training in Ethiopia. She came back and said, I know what I'm going to do to have kids. So I have an Ethiopian grandson, and about a year and a half ago I got a granddaughter also. So I have a grandson, a granddaughter. We are a lake family.
Oh yeah.
Much like the Andy Grimm's family. We are a lake family, so we do spend a fair amount of time at Lake Powell.
Yeah.
And we follow Arizona State University sports, especially football.
Oh, okay.
We do that with our children too. But most of our time is actually involved with our church.
Yeah.
And my wife and I's time is involved with our church and with a couple of underserved communities we've worked with over the years. One of them in downtown Phoenix, and one in an environmental refugee community in northern Kenya.
Oh, very cool. That's very cool. Well, listen, I think I've thought of at least 20 more questions I could ask you, but we've already made so much video here that they're going to have to make it into 2 segments just to fit it in. So at this point, I guess the best thing to do is say, Dr. Gary Clout, thank you very much for your time. Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at A.T. Still University. I think that people that watch this they're gonna get a lot of context to add to what they understand about ATSU and where we came from and where we're going, and most importantly, why. That's probably the thing listening to you talk that I appreciate the most is, man, there's a really strong and compelling why answer for why we're here. So thank you for that.
Yep, we have a purpose, and by the way, I keep dark chocolate in my office just to bribe students and faculty and staff to come visit me once in a while. So come by.
Dark
say hi.
chocolate. Sold.
All
That's
right.
all you needed to say. All right. Hey, my name's Joe. Thanks for joining us for another edition of A Day in the Life, and we will look forward to talking to you again next time.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, thanks and welcome back. I love those, Kit,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that you're going to be doing them. Thanks to Joe for doing that. It's a great idea. It's really nice to be able to get to hear from some of the kind of higher ups at ATSU and what their
Absolutely.
philosophies and thoughts are on things, what they do. It's great. So before we wrap up, do we have any questions out there?
We do. We
All
actually
right.
do have a question. So from one of our watchers on our live stream here, they ask, how do technical standards and the needs to accommodate a student work together? So Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind taking that one.
Sure, that's a really great question. So technical standards are defined by each of our programs to be, and typically we call them minimal qualifications for admission and matriculation. So these are requirements that students need to meet to be qualified to participate in our program. And they need to be qualified with or without accommodation. So if a student doesn't necessarily meet a technical standard without accommodation, as long as we can provide an accommodation that would allow them to meet that standard, then we do so, and they are qualified. So technical standards and accommodations kind of play into that qualified student. So accommodations are provided for qualified students with disabilities. If a student cannot meet a technical standard, even with an accommodation, then they would thereby be defined not qualified.
Okay.
So.
Sense? Great.
Excellent.
Thank you guys so much for being here. I find this topic really interesting. I think it's great. I love this idea of universal design. I just think it's super that we do things right the first way and benefits everyone. So, Kimberly, thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for
Great.
letting us talk.
So our next Lunch and Learn will be on November 1st, and unfortunately we'll still be on daylight time, but we will be going at noon on the Arizona campus. So it'll be a little bit later on the Missouri campus. So noon Arizona time, 2 p.m. Missouri time, and our topic will be, I believe it's Print Show Pro. Is it
Print
correct?
Shop Pro.
Print
yeah.
Shop Pro.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right. So communications and marketing's tool for putting together kind of materials, print materials.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. I guess we do one last little plug for our social media. You want to do that,
Yeah,
Kit?
absolutely. So we're going to start with our Facebook page this time first. We're going to switch it up on you. So our Facebook page actually is its.atsu.edu/FB. So make sure you go there and like that Facebook page when you can. And then also our YouTube page is its.atsu.edu/YT. So make sure you go there and subscribe. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, Kit. And thanks, everyone, for watching. Remember, it's Cybersecurity Month, so be thinking about what you can do to make yourself more safe online. Thanks to Gene and the crew for putting everything together. And we'll be back on November 1st. Thank you much.